Creed 3 hit cinemas this weekend, and so I thought it would be a great time to go back and review every single film in the Rocky Creed franchise, starting of course with the original Rocky from 1976, which I think is a perfect movie and probably the greatest sports film of all time, mostly going back to Sylvester Stallone and his central performance as Rocky Balboa, as well as his amazing script. The first half of this film doesn't have a lot of fighting or a lot of boxing in it. It centers largely on Rocky himself, getting to know him and his sadness that he harbors and his vulnerabilities and his regrets about not being more of a boxer than he is, and his relationship with Adrian, which is the real heart of the film, is Rocky and Adrian's romance. And the second half delivers on all the amazing training montages you want and the amazing final fight. The characters are also way more three-dimensional and fleshed out than they would otherwise be, whether it's Apollo Creed or Paulie or Mickey, thanks to the strength of Stallone's script. This is one of the greats, 10 out of 10. Leading up to Creed 3, I'm reviewing every film in the Rocky franchise, continuing today with Rocky 2, which I think is a strong sequel and a strong second entry in the franchise. Stallone's script is still good, the performances are still great, and it's just fun to spend more time with these iconic characters, even if I feel like a little bit of the magic from the first film is a little bit missing. It follows a pretty similar structure to the first film, with the first half being very introspective with Rocky and Adrian. We see them grapple with the results of the first fight, go on a bit of a spending spree, and it's nice to see how much their lives improve, but we also get a sense that something isn't quite right, and we learn just how important fighting is to Rocky once he can't do it anymore. And then in the second half, we get the amazing training montages and another even more triumphant fight with Creed, who is really good in this movie too because he's angry. In the first one, he was just trying to put on a show, but now he's received death threats and stuff, so he's angry to get back in the ring with Rocky. So I didn't love every plot beat, but overall, I think it's a very strong sequel. 8.5 out of 10. Creed 3 drops in cinemas this weekend, so I thought it would be a great time to go back and review every film in the Rocky Creed franchise, continuing today with Rocky 3, which I think is a good Rocky movie, but not as strong as the other two. I think the writing isn't as good, I think the emotions don't hit as hard, and Adrian has a very, very minimal role in this film, which I don't really love, but besides that, I think it's solid. I love seeing the friendship that Apollo and Rocky develop as Apollo takes on that manager position for Rocky. I think Rocky's arc in this film is really strong, about him regaining his hunger, regaining his eye of the tiger after losing it after he became the champ. And Clubber Lang is a great iconic antagonist for Rocky, played by Mr. T, where he's charismatic and fun to watch, but also poses a very credible and serious threat for Rocky. So not perfect, maybe it's a little repetitive, maybe there's some diminishing returns in there, but I still think it's a good entry in the series. 7.5 out of 10. Leading up to Creed 3, I'm reviewing every film in the Rocky franchise, continuing today with Rocky 4, which is probably the weirdest film in the franchise. It follows pretty much the same formula as 2 and 3, with Rocky coming out for one more fight thanks to a personal vendetta, training harder than ever, and having one more triumphant fight. But it's set to the backdrop of Soviet Russia in Moscow, with Rocky training in the snow, and you get all these shots of the KGB looking weirdly at Rocky, and they play the whole Russian national anthem, and the whole thing has a strange vibe to it, but it's also super over the top in just how many Rocky training montages there are in this film. There's a music number, there's a robot for some reason. Drago is super memorable, not because he's super charismatic or deep, but just because of his stone cold demeanor. I will say, this is probably the most emotionally shallow of the Rocky movies. We don't get into a whole lot of the emotional stuff with Rocky and Adrian. Rocky doesn't really have a substantial arc in this film. 6.5 out of 10. Creed 3 drops in theaters this weekend, and leading up to it, I've been reviewing every film in the Rocky franchise, continuing today with the last film in the original set of Rocky movies, Rocky 5, which I consider to be the weakest film in the franchise. There are some positive elements here, though. I appreciate the fact that this film tries to bring Rocky back to basics a little bit, explore more of the emotional side of things again, more like the first two Rocky movies. Adrian has a little more agency in this plot than she has in some of the past couple of movies. You get some emotional mileage out of Rocky and his son and that relationship. I think the villains are solid just because they're so unlikable and you want to see Rocky take them down. The fatal flaw with this movie is that the central plot revolves around Rocky neglecting his own son in order to focus on and train this new fighter, Tommy Gunn, which Rocky has always been this amazing underdog character. We love him and we feel for him, but this choice that he makes him somewhat of an inherently unlikable character so that we can empathize more with Rocky's son, which I feel like was a huge mistake. 6 out of 10. Leading up to Creed 3 this weekend, I've been reviewing every film in the Rocky Creed film series, continuing today with the very last Rocky movie, Rocky Balboa, which I feel like is a strong, emotionally sound ending to the franchise. Now, maybe it's a little implausible why Rocky gets back in the ring. I have a few complaints about it. I feel like the editing in the final fight is not very good, and it's a little weird how much they bring back Little Marie from the first film, but I feel like everything Rocky goes through in this film emotionally is really, really strong. I love seeing him mourning Adrian's death. He has a lot of emotional scenes with Paulie. Seeing him in his restaurant and checking in on him in this new phase of life is all really interesting to me, and I love the relationship we get with him and his son here, how we kind of get why Robert is kind of frustrated with his place in life right now, but we understand that Rocky and his son need each other, and when they come together, it's super heartwarming. The villain, Mason Dixon, he's just okay, but he fits the story fine, and I do like the ending he gets. 8 out of 10. Leading up to Creed 3, I've been reviewing every film in the Rocky Creed franchise, continuing today with the first Creed movie, which I feel like was a really strong way to continue the franchise and a great film altogether. I think Adonis Creed is a great character. I love his arc in this film, and I love the themes that we have in the film that deal with carving out your own path and living up to your legacy. I thought all that was very strong. Michael B. Jordan's performance is very strong. I love Rocky's role in this movie. I love how he takes on the manager role, and how Adonis kind of becomes his reason to keep on living, like Mickey with him. I think all the romance with Adonis and Bianca is really strong, and like all great Rocky movies, it finds the balance between the drama, romance, and the relationships, and the training montages and the fighting really well. I love the final fight and the way it kind of mirrors the original Rocky in its ending. My only small issue with the film is I think the villains are pretty forgettable. Like, they forget to kind of develop or flesh out any of the villains, and they're not charismatic enough to be memorable. 8.5 out of 10. Creed 3 drops in theaters this weekend, and leading up to it, I've been reviewing every film in the Rocky Creed franchise, continuing today with Creed 2, which I feel like is a great sequel and a great installment in the Rocky franchise overall. I have more nitpicks with maybe elements of the plot of this one than the first one, and I also actually really like that this one feels like a bit more of a conventional Rocky movie. There are elements where you say, oh, that's kind of like what happens in Rocky 2, that's kind of like what happens in Rocky 3. But I think it's a really strong sequel. I love the return of the Dragos and how this film utilizes them and takes all these over-the-top elements from Rocky 4 and plays it completely seriously. I think that makes for a great villain plot. Still thoroughly invested in Adonis and his story as he has a daughter and grapples with his most personal challenge yet. It's a very somber film. And I love Rocky's role in this film as he takes on that Mick role again, and I love the ending we get with his son. Training montages are as good as ever, fights are as good as ever, another great one, 8.5 out of 10. Last night, I was finally able to see Creed 3, and I thought it was a great installment in this franchise and a great third Creed movie with a very personal story for Adonis as we see him in this new phase of life where he's kind of taken on the trainer role and stepped away from boxing a little bit. Of course, his relationship with Bianca as well as with his mother is very front and center in this film, as well as with him raising his daughter, Amara. And there are some plot elements here where you look at it and say, that's kind of similar to Rocky 3. Maybe that plays kind of like Rocky 4. And I mean that as a compliment. Despite the absence of Rocky, it very much feels like a good installment in this franchise. But while I missed Rocky, the narrative of this film works perfectly well without him. And then, of course, Jonathan Majors' Damien is already one of the best villains in this franchise because of Jonathan Majors' amazing performance and just how much he can convey in a facial expression. He's scary, and with his personal connections to Adonis. So, a great third Creed movie I thoroughly enjoyed.
What did you think about it?
Thought it was good.
Byron?
Thought it was bad.
No, you didn't.